Hey friends, thanks for listening to Doug Padgett Radio. This is a conversation that I had with Phyllis Tickle on September 11th, 2012. We talk about her book, Emergence Christianity, which is a terrific book, but it's also going to be an event, and it's an event that I'm helping to host along with Tony Jones on January 11th and 12th of 2013 in Memphis, Tennessee. Would love for you to come along if you find this conversation interesting. Phyllis is living in Memphis, and we did this conversation here in Memphis, Tennessee. And Phyllis has been a thinker and a chronicler and a commentator on many things of religion in the United States. She's quite an accomplished person and has set her sights and her interests on the issues of emergence theory and emerging Christianity. And so it's a real treat to be with my friend Phyllis. So over the next hour, you're going to hear our rambling conversation, and I think you'll find it worthwhile. I certainly found it worthwhile to engage with Phyllis and appreciate her so much. So here it is, a conversation recorded in front of a live audience in Memphis, Tennessee, with me and Phyllis Tickle. So here you go, enjoy.
If you've come today, you might know Phyllis Tickle. This is Phyllis, and you might not be aware that Phyllis has a new book called Emergence Christianity. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and this is going to be used both for encouragement of the content that comes from today and also hopefully promotion for people to come and join us on January 11th and 12th of 2013. So let's talk a little bit about the book.
All right.
For people that already know Phyllis Tickle, Phyllis Tickle has written some books in her life.
Yes, the woman never shuts up.
Yes, she has. She has much to say.
The silence scares me.
Do you keep track of the number of books that you have written?
Do you?
Of the books that you've written?
No.
No, I have. I don't know how many books you've written.
I don't either. I honestly don't.
More than a handful. A couple of handfuls of books.
I can count my kids, but not my books. Yeah.
A number of books. So that raises
a couple of dozen anyway.
A couple of dozen books. So that raises an interesting question from my vantage point, which is, having written a number of books, why did you decide to write Emergence Christianity? What it is, where it's going, and why it matters? Like what was in you that
How
caused
long
you?
Do you have?
We have. Give us the 3-minute version
There is no 3-minute version. There is no 3-minute.
Why you're ready. I'll take that.
I never meant to get in this mess, if that's what you're asking. I started out as an academic because I had a husband who had to be supported. There's nothing unusual about that, right?
Yeah.
And he kept wanting to take another 2 or 3 years of grad, and then post-grad, and then post-grad, and it just got to be awful. So, but anyway, I was an academic. And I was fine when I was teaching at Rhodes here in town. And then I got made into the academic dean at a sister college, at the College of Art. And 6 years of being an academic dean cured me. I really woke up one morning and said, if I chair another curriculum committee meeting, I'm going to kill somebody. Yeah. At which point I knew it was time to quit. So I quit. And the only thing left was publishing. So I thought, all right, it's still words. And I spent 36 years, I guess, of my life as head of a small Southern press that then got bought by another Southern press that then got bought by another. And in the publishing industry, if you go, the head of house always goes with the contract.
Yes.
So I ended up like this and woke up one day after 36 years and said, what am I doing? I always wanted to be a writer. I'm going to quit and retire. I was 59. It didn't seem premature at that point, right? And it lasted 13 months and we're now into 90 or 91, like that. Before Publishers Weekly, which is the industry journal, trade industry journal, for the book industry in the English language, and had been around 130 years at that point, called and said, we're in real trouble. And I didn't know them. I knew them as my industry journal, but I didn't know the folk at all. Called and said, we're in trouble because if you will remember, by 88, 89, 1991, religion books were suddenly on the top of the list. We were being embraced by the light and tickled by angels and all of those things. And we were on and we were on this big Buddhist roll, and everybody wanted to be a Jew-boo with Christocentric proclivities and all of that kind of stuff. And religion books had never been published commercially in this
Really?
country. Not much. Harper had done some and Doubleday, but not really. And not at the bestseller list. I mean, you did esoteric things just for preachers, which we know goes nowhere. But anyway, suddenly these things were, and there was no provision. So when Publishers Weekly called, they said, we need a religion department. They never had one, wasn't any reason. We want a religion department.
And Publishers Weekly would report on the publishing industry.
And we would look at the books, and we would, would
give reviews.
And would give reviews, and would give, so that there was honest to goodness stature for religion. What a concept, So I said, yes, I'll do it for 18 months, which was the deal. And within 18 months, any fool who's had any administrative experience can put up a department within a magazine that's been around that long. And they said, here's the checkbook, do what you have to do. That was the other part of it. But within 18 months, it was really obvious that they didn't need a department of religion. We had 7 people working on it by that time, so it was, they didn't need me to do that. What they needed, publishers they don't speak. The question was, what the hell's going on? That was how they would put it. They would call and say, what the hell's going on? So it was clear that what I needed to do was to begin to speak to librarians, acquisition editors, publishers, booksellers about what the hell was going on. Which then, because I was an academic, took me back to the scholarship.
I see.
It doesn't take
So they were
long.
trying to figure out what's happening in
what do we
religious
publish?
movements.
What do we acquire? What in the world is going on? And they had no basis for it. So by 94, I was spending most of my time not in New York, but in the local airport.
Going around and finding out what people are up to.
Well, no, talking to publishers, and at that time it really was an academic exercise. Can you look and show us what the flow is, why it's happening? And so from then,
you started to describe what's happening on the religious landscape.
As a reporter, let's say, I'm not a good reporter. No academic is a good reporter, right? We want to tell you why it happened. We don't want to tell you what happened, just why it happened, okay?
I see.
But so from a journalistic point of view, maybe I should say, from an objective point of view, we in the South had this wonderful expression, I don't have a dog in this fight.
Yes.
Well, I didn't have a
President
dog in the fight.
President Clinton used to say that.
That's
stuff.
right.
Yes.
See where it got him. But as long as I didn't have a dog in the fight, I could objectively. And let's be honest, the cash register, when the cash register goes off, it's telling you that something has hit home. I don't think it's the whole yardstick, but it's a good one. And so I was responding in terms of what was selling, why it was selling, and then answering the question, so why is this selling? What is this telling me? And then by 2004, I still would like to think, though I think it's Fig Newton of my imagination, I would like to think I don't have a dog in the fight, but you and I both know that I've covered this thing enough so I don't trust my own objectivity anymore. You guys are very attractive human beings, right? And the theology of emergence definitely is attractive. And I find myself lessening the distance between me and the thing I'm talking about.
I see.
So that's the longest answer, not 3 minutes, to a question. But the basic answer is I came to the Great Emergence, which precedes this book, out of a need to just plain folk, not acquisitions editors, not booksellers, not any of that. This is what's happening. And there's a pattern here. There's, every academic sees the pattern. Well, more or less. Many academics see the pattern. It certainly is not my discovery. There's a pattern there, and there's a history there, and this is what we're doing. And unlike previous times of doing this, we at least know we're doing it, and that has a huge responsibility.
So give us the thumbnail on the book, The Great Emergence. What pattern you saw in the Great Emergence?
Again, it's not original with me. The Roman Catholic Church was using the 500-year cycle by 1962 in teaching its catechumens, or rikas, or whatever you want to call it. And you can trace it back to the 60s, where the Roman Church. But they've been here before and bought this T-shirt and didn't like it all that much, right? I mean, 500 years ago they found. But every 500 years, the Latinized Church, which is not true of all of Christianity. What we're talking about here is a Latinized phenomenon. Every 500 years, we go through this giant whoopee, or whatever you want to call it, in which every single part of life changes, including religion. One of the things that drives me crazy about the Great Emergence is especially if you're talking to religious folk, they want the whole bloody thing to be about religion.
Yes.
That's a crock.
Yeah.
That's not what it is.
Very religion-centric.
Exactly. It's like saying the Reformation was only about Protestantism. Well, excuse me?
Yeah.
It's the rise of capitalism, the coming of humanism, the rise of the middle class. It's all those things. Mm-hmm. Everything changed. And, oh, by the way, it gave us Protestantism. Mm-hmm. Well, the Great Emergence is everything.
Let's take a moment and pause there. What do you think it is about this impulse for some religious people to want to see the world primarily through the lens of religion, as opposed to seeing the lens through a larger cultural dynamic and shift, of which religion is a part of it?
That's right.
Is that because there's a sense that religion is being diminished, and if it's just another cultural reality that people feel that it's not important?
I don't know. I think somehow those of us, some of us who are religious, suffer from low self-esteem or low self-confidence or something. It's very threatening if the whole world doesn't play by our set of rules. And so therefore, when the culture starts changing, we want to be in charge of the religion part of it. That's going to be the school marm or something. And it's truly unfortunate, and it's awfully limiting, I think, when all of life is shaped by religion. No, I think all of my life is shaped by my religion. All of my life is, I would like to think, shaped by my faith. And my faith is informed by my community. And to some extent, my community is restricted or formed by my religion. But this can't be the big thing.
Yes.
This has to be what it's about. And faith and religion aren't necessarily the same thing. But for the Abrahamics, the community in between those two extremes is the formative part, I think. But to want religion to be the whole thing is to not understand that religion is contextual. Yeah. It has a duty. It has a sociological function. It's supposed to inform the society in which it exists, right? It's supposed to tell us why we're here, what's the meaning, what's the purpose. That's the function of the institution we call religion, which is not necessarily the same thing as my faith or my community's experience as people of faith. This can be arbitrated, this can be, But also, this is shaped by the society, which it informs.
So in these 500-year turnings, there have been some that are, one that's most famous to people about 500 years ago.
About 500 years ago, we called it the Great Reformation.
Great Reformation.
That's
and
right.
and for a lot of us, that gets marked by a particular person.
That's right.
Luther, and a particular activity. But it really was a long time in coming. That was 100 years or more that the Reformation started to sort of take. So even these transitions you're suggesting take 100, 150 years?
It's 150 years every time. You go back 1,000 years to the Great Schism. You can watch the thing.
Okay, so walk us through that. We're in 2000. You go back 500 years to the Reformation.
Okay, in the Reformation. Then you go to the Great Schism. Then you go to
what was the Great Schism for people that weren't paying attention that day in school when they...
The Great Schism was when the East and the West decided to not speak to each other anymore.
Yeah. A lot of people don't even recognize that there's a whole Eastern Church, Orthodox Church.
Absolutely. And we in the Latinized West kissed them goodbye.
Yeah.
And 1,500 years ago, you hit the Great Decline and Fall
of Rome.
When the whole thing. 2,000 years ago, you hit the Great Transformation, and we even date things from that, right?
Right.
The change of the Christian era. And if you go back, if you're a good Jew, you would rise up right now and say, "Oh, whoa." If you go back 500 years more, you hit the Babylonian captivity and the end of First Temple Judaism and in a second. You go back 500 that, you hit the end of the Age of Judges and the coming of the Davidic dynasty, out of which Meshach was to come. So it has to do with that part of the world that was susceptible to having its Christianity received through the Latin language, but those sensibilities existed before Christianity.
Yeah. And there might even be some, in cultures that haven't followed along any kind of a Judeo-Christian calendar, there's these same 500-year turnings that seem to happen, aren't there?
Well,
historians notice these things.
Some historians would argue that. Systems theorists are fascinating folk, and they will tell you that that's sort of a capricious thing, that the 500 years seems to be indigenous or whatever to this mindset, to the mindset that can speak Latin easier than it can speak Greek, for instance, and that when you get other cycles, for instance, in Mayan, I believe it went 500 years, but there was a superimposed other cycle that went, I don't remember all. But anyway, systems theorists will argue and give you more math than you ever wanted.
That's right.
To tell you why it's so.
Blinded by science.
Blinded by science. But there is, in the pattern, within the 500 years, there's this thing of there's 150 years before we're into. Each of these is marked. We can sit here and say 9/11 is going to go down in history as the mark for the Great Emergence. October the 31st, 1517 is when we have the Reformation. Well, that's bull.
Yeah.
It didn't just happen. There's a 150-year lead up.
Right. It wasn't like the Enlightenment started by someone turning on a light switch and said,
it didn't happen that way. But
it's been dark this whole time.
It's an academic convenience to be able to say, here it is, 1517, and that's all it is. Yeah. So it's an academic convenience to be able to say, by 9/11, we know that we're into it. But there's a 150-year tick up to it called the Perry Emergence, and there's a 150 Perry Reformation, Perry whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Great Emergence as a book deals with what it is and why it came about.
That we're currently at the front end of one of these transitional periods.
Yes. We have now arrived at the Great Emergence, and now we have about 100 years. Historically, again, if the pattern holds, thank you, systems theorists, we have about 100 years to decide some things. Where now is the authority? What now is the theology going to be?
So to put this timing down, you suggested in the Great Emergence book that there is this. We are in the midst of a larger transition that fits into a historic pattern.
That's right. We're in a particular for which there is a general.
And we're at this beginning stages in this 150-year...
The 150 years have ended.
The
150 years commonly are dated from 1842 right up to 9/11.
So 1842 to 2000.
This is your peri-emergence. That's right.
Okay.
Now we're into the... what do we do now?
Now what do we do?
We'll have about 100 years in which we have to answer that question. Where now is your authority? How are you going to do it? Why? Where's your theology? What's the canon of Scripture? What's your Christology? It's all up for grabs. What's the nature of your Trinity?
And again, these are cultural transitions that are happening across the landscape in every field.
That's right. And 100 years from now, we're going to wake up with all those questions solved. Aren't you happy? And then we're going to have 250 years, if we hold the pattern, 250 years in which we agree. That's where the authority is. And then we will start another Perry.
So a Great Emergence book argued that there's 500-year pattern. You pick up Emergence Christianity with the story of, okay, if we've just lived through the 150 years of peri-emergence, the pre or the setting the table for that.
Right.
So in this book, you ask the reader to go with you on a 150-year telling of the development in religious expression in North America predominantly.
The Latinized world,
the effect in North America.
Europe, and here.
And so people might be surprised picking up Emergence Christianity, what it is, where it's going, and why it matters, and seeing, it's got an Android-like telephone
I loved
cover
it
on
when
there.
I saw the cover.
Yeah, they couldn't get an iPhone.
I don't know.
Anyway. So anyway, they have an Android, which
Apple
whatever
didn't
that's
belly up to the bar.
I guess so. I guess so. Whatever that's worth. Not everybody knows that difference, but anyway, it's got an Android. It's got an Android phone, sort of very modern day cover to it. But you ask us to go back to, I think you mentioned earlier, 1842.
Yes.
And you want us to think about developments that are happening in science and thinking from 1842 and really to come forward, because there's a lot of people who critique emerging culture, emergence Christianity, emergence networks, emerging church language as being sort of early 21st century overly educated hipsters that have a chip on their shoulder about how the church didn't give them enough and they want to go be cool in another school.
Yeah.
And you try to draw this frame much larger than that.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about, before you give us spill all the beans as to what's in here, because we want people to buy the book, of course, and come to the conference. But why do you think that is so important to continue to draw the frame larger?
Okay. Because we really are. Again, if history holds, and I don't know why it wouldn't, we're in that now, the beginning of that century in which we will be answering the questions, in which the new tributary, I'm reluctant to call Emergence Christianity a movement. I don't like that terminology.
Yeah.
This is a new tributary in the river of Christianity, in the same way that Roman Catholicism is a tributary, Anglicanism is, Protestantism was. This is a new tributary. And we have 100 years in which to decide, basically, not to put too fine a point on it, what the next 500 years of Christianity is going to look like in this tributary. And as this tributary flows into the larger river, how the river will be affected. This is the first time that Christians have known that. In the past, there was not any opportunity to share that information. Now we know it. And
so there's a level of self-consciousness.
There's a level, there has to be a level of self-consciousness. And it is wrong, I think, to go into that with an inadequate understanding of how we got here and why it desperately matters that whatever we do over the next 100 years, and our children and grandchildren do, has a clear understanding of what we've come from and what it is we're trying to do. And so it drives me crazy, for instance, when I hear emerging and emergent conflated as if they were the same thing and as if they were the whole thing. That's not it. There is this larger thing called 500 years ago.
And imagine that bothers you the way that it bothers you if someone throws all Pentecostal churches into the same category.
Thing,
or Methodists and Episcopalians are the same thing. That's what you mean. Like it bugs you that people don't know.
Well, 500 years ago, Luther didn't want to be a protester or a reformer, right? Remember
he
that?
Stayed a Catholic priest.
He hated it. I hate rhetoric,
Yeah.
But we got Protestantism, and we all know what Protestantism is. We can it's a set of sensibilities, right? And we can sort of sit here and say who they are. But you've got Methodists and Presbyterians and Lutherans and Baptists all under the same rubric, and we recognize that each of those is a distinct and different thing, and they don't always get along.
Right.
But all Methodists are Protestants, but not all Protestants are Methodists.
Right.
Yeah. All Baptists think that all Protestants are Baptists, but other than that, other than that, no offense.
Yeah.
In the same way, we've got this thing, Emergence Christianity, and it's got divisions, and emerging, and emergent, and neo-monastic, and hyphenated, and cyber church, and deep church, and mission. They're legitimate configurations within the overarching conversation. So Emergence Christianity is a set of sensibilities. It's a conversation.
So our family systems people would say, you have members of the family that are all fully the family, but they
don't like each other.
They don't necessarily. They're not all the same.
That's right.
They don't get along as well as they might want to. If we think about the
Reformation, we will remember that Zwingli and Luther didn't like each other a whole lot. I mean, they had some really ugly words, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the same way, you're picking up tensions now, you know this, between emerging and emergent.
Yeah.
Now, what scares me about that is that when in the conversation there's a conflation of the two, you know what you're talking about. And when there's a conflation of them with Emergence Christianity, you're leaving out about 7/10 of the whole thing. If you deal just so the rhetoric, unfortunately, matters. That's part of the impetus behind this. But the real impetus behind this book, I think, is those of you who are dealing in Emergence Christianity, regardless of the category, are entitled, before I quit and go somewhere else, wherever, get off the bus, are entitled to the story of how you got here, and of the heritage. I think this is a family history of what Emergence Christianity is. I'd like to think that.
It really is a fun story to read. It's a quick read to the book. At least I felt that it was that way. I was amazed at your ability to look back over this history and to pick out these people and influences who, for someone in 2012 right now and doing some sort of expression of Christianity in North America, to realize that you had picked out someone 100 years earlier for whom their experimentation or thought or promptings that they were about led to something 100 years down the road. And you don't say this in the book, but I had this sense in reading that part that you were prompting us to think not only about the kinds of churches that we're wanting for now, but trying to recognize that we will be that 100-year-ago history for people 100 years from now. And so
and you better build well.
Build well. And take this a little bit take this for what it is, maybe not more seriously, but just recognize that our lives are our great-grandchildren's histories.
That's right.
And you found that to be meaningful, I think, in a way in the book that's really
Good.
great.
I hope so. Because it's a wonderful story. I think it's a wonderful story to look outside and tell. I'm not sure how cool it is to be inside and doing it, but to look outside and tell, And there are other things. I mean, everybody has an axe to grind at some point, right? And one of the things that drove me to this is the corruption of the notion of what emergence means. It's the most unfortunate title in the world. Why we should have the Great Emergence, I don't know. One of the fun things.
Okay, so let me push you on that a little bit, because you say regularly in the book, you go through this long explanation of I don't know where this word came from. Most people I know would equate the word Great Emergence and Emergence Christianity with a person named Phyllis Tickle.
Which is most
they would say,
I did not invent it.
You're the one that coined this phrase in its reference to the Great Transition and the Great Reformation and the Great Schism, and then they hear you being the one who owns the Great Emergence. So talk a bit about that, because I know you want to.
If it gets the word out there, I don't care what pony it rides the in on. But
so you're not trying to coin the Phyllis Tickle take on things.
The funniest thing is that, for me anyway, in 1962, somewhere along there, the president of the American Historical Association, who was quite prominent at that time, obviously, as an academic historian, a man named Charles Bridenbrow. And Dr. Bridenbrow gave his whole inaugural address in the Waldorf Astoria, no less, talking about the shift we were in and suggesting to his fellow historians that they all began to call it the Great Mutation. Now, of all the things that could have happened, that's the worst. Emergence is better than the Great Mutation.
Was it the Great Mutation from Mars or anything?
Can you imagine mutation Christianity? I mean, I just love it.
We would be mutants, I guess, by that.
I mean, dead serious. And you can still Google the Great Mutation, and Charles will come up. And some historians still are right. So this thing has had lots of names.
Yes.
There was a very popular book, the Fifth Great the Fifth Turning. Remember that one, which was an attempt to call this thing, obviously number one, number one, number two was the Reformation, number three, and you go back this way. The Fourth Great Awakening was an attempt to, at one point, to name this thing by academics, again, primarily out of Yale University, an attempt to call it the Great Convergence. None of those stuck. And Emergence stuck simply because it wasn't named by Phyllis Tickle. It was named by sociologists and biologists. Because they were dealing with emergence theory in their laboratories.
So you
and
have
emergence
this great
theory is why it's called this.
So in the book, you bring us all the way back to the debates around Darwinism and Charles Darwin.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting because this emergence theory you suggest in the book has its roots way back in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where people were saying Darwinism as an explanation of biological development can't explain everything.
That's right.
There's something else that goes on in development. Something else emerges that doesn't just follow this kind of mutant changing over in an evolutionary way. There's something that happens according to another set of rules.
Abrupt.
And doesn't disagree with it, with Darwinism. It just suggests there's something in addition to that. Is that right?
That's absolutely right.
So talk a little bit about that.
By the time in 1859, when Darwin first came out, most scientists did agree with him about the survival of the fittest and the origin of the species. But you hit this body of scientists. Lewes, H.G.W. Lewes, as a matter of fact, George Lewes, was the most vocal of them. And by 1870, you got Lewes writing, saying that, yes, we've always known that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but sometimes we get a whole whose sum could not be possibly predicted from an analysis of its component parts. And he went on to say human consciousness, in particular, cannot be explained by Darwinian principles in any way, nor can it be explained by some sort of evolutionary thing. What happens is that at some point, something abruptly enters. And it enters not from the top down and doesn't come from the bottom up. It comes sideways and changes things. And that he called emergence theory. And he lived almost to the turn of the century. And both sociologists, not that that discipline existed at that time, but biologists also began to explain all kinds of things we didn't understand in nature. A starfish, for instance. There's a great book called The Spider and the Starfish that does this by George Johnson. You flip a starfish like this, the body will fall off and you'll have a leg, right?
Yeah.
Well, the starfish will grow a new leg, but the leg will grow a new starfish. Now, if you do that to a spider, he'll bite you. No, if you do that to a spider, do it twice, he'll die. But no new leg and no new spider.
Yeah.
So why is it? Why is it when birds are flying over and one is in the lead and then just abruptly out of nowhere another one will come and take over the lead and this one drops back? What's the difference between an anthill and a beehive? Those are all emergence theory things that we couldn't understand until Lewis and company came along. But the fascination still was with human consciousness. And it became, and for a while, emergence theory dropped out of academic vogue or whatever. And then by the time you get into the 1930s, you're getting what Philip Clayton calls the re-emergence of emergence. And you're getting it for a very good reason, because by the time you get to the 1940s, you're getting information theory. You're getting Norbert Wiener calling information theory. You've got Claude Shannon, you've got Alan Turing, all of them playing with what's going to ultimately be the computer, but recognizing that information is a binary thing. And all of this, and emergence theory begins to be part of information theory, which begins to be our present understanding that in all possibility there may be just information. Okay, that didn't knock you out of your chair. All right, okay. Well, mass came out of the Reformation, right?
Right.
And then we got energy, an understanding of energy out of Einsteinian. Now it looks as if what we really have is information.
Yeah.
And and that's emergence theory, and that's why this thing got called the Great Emergence. It was the time in which we began to understand this, and it didn't come from the bottom up or the top down. It came like this, and it organizes communally. It's in a whole different, there's no hierarchy.
So in some ways
so,
there's
well, no, wait a minute, let me finish. Okay? All right, because I'm leading up here to a biggie, all right? Which is why philosophers and theologians now and physical scientists are beginning to arrive at a rapprochement in which an increasing number of them are beginning to say, you Judeo-Christians may have had it right in the first place. This is exciting to me. In arche hein hologos, kai hologos hotheosein, in the beginning was the Word.
Yeah.
And the Word was God. And all things came from the Word, which is...
There's a way to understand that.
Which is startling.
Yeah.
Which is startling. And that's the kind of thing that I think makes it matter, that we understand the story. Because we have this huge history that has nothing to do with the verb to emerge, or with emergent herbicide, or with emerging... It's a so much larger context. But if you're in a big context, you sure as heck ought to know you're in a big one, instead of in some little, jerky thing down here.
So in some ways you're suggesting this is the kind of Christianity that's developing in an age of emergence.
I'm suggesting that, yes, I'm suggesting that we have made a new shift, a great shift, in probably Judeo-Christianity is where I would go. We've made a huge shift that is concomitant with other shifts in the culture and concomitant with a historical pattern, right on time. But that, like Harvey Cox, I would argue that this is more important than anything that's happened since the change of the era. And he certainly has got the credentials to say that. I can only quote him and borrow his credentials, and there are other people saying it too. But this one is significant because, among other things, we've now moved into what's being called the Age of the Spirit. And we've just finished 2,000 years of the Age of the Son, which had 2,000 years before it of God the Father. And so thus the Trinitarian prayer I love, Father teach us, Christos lead us, Spirit now receive us.
So you're seeing a 2,000-year history of God in Trinitarian language, God the Father, and then 2,000 years of Christianity,
God the Son,
centered around Jesus.
And then it looks like, and this again isn't me. I didn't make this up. You can't make this stuff up, right? But if you look,
I have some atheist friends who would say you could.
Well,
but anyway.
yeah, but they made up their stuff too. I can tell them why.
We're all pretty good at this.
But if you look at the mystics, for instance,
Yeah.
the 12th and 13th century mystics, they all laid out that pattern. And I don't think you can unsay folk like Harvey Cox, who are willing to go out there and say something. Pentecostalism is a good sign that something major happened, and it's part of emergence.
Okay, so I want to ask you about this. There's we're all familiar with critiquing the sky is falling characters, right? The people who run around and tell you how bad the world is and that things are going to be so bad that we should all run for the hills. Do you ever worry that some of us want to overplay the significance of our time? By
Some of us being named Phyllis Tickle.
Well, no, I mean just well, maybe all of us. Maybe it taps into, because I've heard this critique where people have said,
I've heard it too.
"Boy, you people really want to like talk about your thing inside of like these grand meta narratives."
Yeah, that's right, meta narratives.
You have such an obsession with living your life in a time of importance. Talk about that a little
Well,
bit.
better to err that way than the other way, right? I mean, what is the sin in thinking that everything you do matters?
That's right.
As opposed to just, I'll do whatever I damn well please, and, devil take the hindmost. So if I'm going to err, I'd rather err that way.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's a lack of intellectual responsibility if you take that position. I think that you need to look, those who have that need to look at the record, need to look at the history, need to look at the footnotes, need to check it out, and then come back and say, I find fallacies here, here, and here in your argument. That's to engage in a worthy conversation. And one of the lovely things about being on the road a great deal, and I'll miss it when I kind of hang it up at the end of next year, is that very often, maybe once in every 6 appearances, I will get somebody in an audience who will challenge something. And challenge it with intelligence and with footnote. And I've had to back off several times and say, you're absolutely right. I clearly was in error. I missaw here. And sometimes I can counter with saying, no, I think here. But to just say a meta-narrative needs to go away is irresponsible.
Because you think it's real.
I think it's real. I mean, hundreds of people think it's real.
I do too,
And more footnotes. You could choke the devil on the footnotes.
There are a lot. You've done your part.
And you wouldn't believe how many Baker took out.
Oh, is that so?
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course. They said, there's more footnote than book here. And I said, that would be true. That's the academic wanting to,
Yes.
I never saw a footnote I didn't like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, without putting too fine of a point on what Emergence Christianity is going to look like, you try in the book to identify a few elements that are seem to be indicative that something is not as it was.
That's right.
Can you laundry list out of your mind, or any of importance, or mention a couple of the characteristics that caused you to notice, hey, something is different? Because some of us have only experienced Christianity in the last 15 or 20 years of life. Some people last 40 or 50. That's not very long. Or experienced Christianity through really broad history that just feels like those people a long time ago. So this just all is the water we swim in.
Yes.
So we see the change in the role of clergy as really normative, but you note that a shift in the role of clergy is a part of this emergence.
Of course it is.
Christianity. But for some of us, we didn't even know that. I mean, other than sort of academically.
Academically, no.
So can you tick off a few of the things that you
clearly
have
the clergy is no longer a privileged class, and you don't even want clergy to be privileged unless you're. Let's make a distinction between inherited or traditional, what do you want to call it, church, and emergence church. All right, because they're fresh expression of church, if you want to call it that. In traditional or inherited church, clergy is a privileged thing. Out here in emergence, it can't be. It has to be a fellow servant. It doesn't even necessarily have to be there. One of the things that is up for grabs right now, I think, and we were having a conversation earlier about, is the nature of the sacraments. And one of the things that inherited church is going to have to deal with, and inherited church needs to know this as much as emergence, maybe more as far as that. Inherited church is going to have to deal with how it interfaces with emergence. because it's going to have to, in the same way that Rome had to learn to live with Protestants. We're going to have to learn to live with. And what is the nature of the sacrament? What is the nature of the diaconate coming out of established church as it becomes the most logical conveyor, if you will, of the sacraments into emergence congregations where there is no appointed or ordained clergy? I totally agree with many of the young pastors in emergence who don't want to go to seminary. God forbid, because it's not an education, it's a programming.
Yeah.
And their argument is seminaries come with the Reformation, right? And they are owned by the Presbyterian Church or the Baptist Church or the Methodist Church. All of them, with the exception of Fuller maybe, are owned, which has to say that they have a dog in this fight, that there is, you're going to learn Methodist Christianity over here, or you're going to learn Presbyterian. And that's a violation of what emergence wants to be. So that's a huge issue.
It is.
The desire to be transient, which I love. It's one of the things about emergence that appeals to me. God forbid we should build these huge things, because then we're no longer nimble.
So there's a sense of architecture, buildings, or where you meet.
A sense of the need to be nimble. Yeah. The British, who have been at this self-consciously a lot longer than we in North America have begun to talk about a spectrum, if you will, of tent, synagogue, and temple, in which they say that the tent is mobile, and they say this is how it's always been in the Judeo-Christian faith, up until about 40 years ago when we decided to quit doing the tent part, or we lost the ability to. But the tent is nimble. The tent can go wherever it needs to go. But it needs the synagogue. It needs the community. But but ultimately, it also needs a temple out here. So let's use the Roman and Protestant temples or cathedrals or whatever to go to on pilgrimage, or to go to Christmas Eve, or to go to whatever. But let's bring it back down to the community level or to the tent level. Let's go back to the domestic transmission of the faith, or the emphasis there, which is a very reasonable approach to what emergence is doing. And it's an interesting, again, established church is going to have to be willing to be used on Christmas Eve and never funded.
Right.
Are they willing to do that? Is Jerusalem willing to give to Antioch? This kind of thing. So all the transient thing, the nimbleness thing, also has the advantage that when an emergence group, and you know this, when an emergence group has set up what it's doing, it can just decide, okay, we're done.
We're done now.
We're done now. That was fun. 3 years of my life, whatever. And they will go. But every time they do, there are 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 new communities that start, right?
Yes,
it's
right.
like a milkweed pod bursting in the autumn. And, so it's deeply missional. Missional in a way that, I would say in a way that the church has not been able to be since the 1st or 2nd century.
So you've named clergy?
There's a whole laundry list. You asked for a laundry list. I haven't even got beyond the underwear.
So here's 3. Clergy, sacrament, and permanence.
Permanence?
When people in the clergy
what?
When people in the clergy world hear you say, okay, up for grabs in Emergence Christianity are the role and the prominence of clergy, the role and the significance of sacraments,
yes,
which you get to control, and the permanence of buildings, that's probably not going to be here. How do they not freak out about
they usually
their
do
own,
through the back door.
About their own place, whether with their bodies or with just their own worry, their own concern? How truly?
One of the things, we can sit here and laugh, and it's not even funny. I guess my heart is, part of my heart anyway, is with Inherited Church. It is with Jerusalem. So I do some clericacies, and almost always, it doesn't matter what I go in there to start to do, within 20 minutes, some pastor, it's usually a male, and it's usually 50, 52, somewhere along there, to 58, will stand up and say, I don't want to interrupt, but what I need to know is, do I need to go look for another job?
Yes.
And it's a heartbreaker. It really is. And it happens so consistently.
And what's your answer?
Well, and he's asking because, well, shh. No, and he will go on to say, or it will be obvious, I'm 10, 12 years from retirement.
Yes. Can I make it?
Can I make it is really what he's asking. Yep. And I get phone calls about that too. Yeah. And my answer to that is, I don't know. I truly don't know. I can look at the increasing number of bivocationals and know that that's a reasonable thing to do. I can also look at mostly the men. I can look at those men and know they've spent their whole lives training to do this and are exquisitely good at it. And is there going to be, and I don't know. I do know that those pastors who, and you have to usually shoot the church organist and fire the vestry to pull this off, but those pastors, senior pastors that have been able to put an emergence, again, the Brits, who are so far ahead of us, they have a thing they call hen and chicks.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you can turn your church into the mother hen for some chicks, for some groups, either meeting in your facility or out, where you consecrate the sacraments, for instance, and they go to the local bar, okay? Yeah. I mean, if you can jump that, you may have to shoot a bishop too, but if you can do that, then what you're really doing is scattering your mission.
I see.
But you're being schizophrenic, pastorally.
One of the great things about the book is that in the middle of it, there's these color photographs.
I love those.
15, 20 pages.
I couldn't believe 32.
32 pages.
I asked for 48, and they said, "You're kidding. Do you know what it costs?"
32 pages of photographs of examples.
Sure.
And in some ways,
to see instead of hear.
Yes, and I looked at those, and what struck my mind, I'm in some of them, so I
sure
sort of had a
them,
thought of like, okay, in some ways, they feel like the car show. Right, in Detroit. If you go to the car show, you're going to see the prototypes.
That's right.
And those prototypes run and drive, but there's one or two of those prototypes, right, of these sort of wowzer kinds of cars that are so, like, you got to be kidding me, that's either cool or ridiculously bizarre. But those prototypes are going to find features that are going to become normative in cars in the next 5 and 10 years.
That would be true.
In some ways, is that what you're doing with those photos? Like, no, all of you don't have to stop doing what you're doing and become these 32 pages of photographs. Because I'm sure people will look at that and just be like, there's no way that, that's just not me. That's not our people. That seems so distant from what we do. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear you saying, leave the Honda and get into the prototype.
No.
But rather you're saying there's pieces of that
right.
that you should notice, listen to, and it's going to show up and become normative for the people in your congregation. And you're not going to be fully like this, but you're going to be partially like that? Is that
That's part of it.
Is that right?
And I also think, in my case to Baker, because it is a lot of money, you and I both know it, is that people are entitled to see and not just hear.
Yeah.
You need to look at it, and you can't go look. So that's part of it. Part of it is, I think... Part of it is that established church is going to share space with fresh expression. And it needs to be comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. It needs to be sympathetic with it. It needs to be... The Archbishop of Canterbury, God love him, and I've quoted him so many times that I've said it more often than he has, and he says it every time he opens his mouth, so that tells you. But, he says to the people in the Church of England, "My brothers and sisters in Christ, if we think we're here to save the Church of England, may God have mercy on our immortal souls. We're here to serve the kingdom of God, and behold, God is doing a new thing among us. And this is the new thing. And I don't know how you respect that which you can't know. Mm-hmm. So maybe the pictures are there for my friends in the Inherited Church. Maybe that's why I wanted the pictures. Because Emergence know what these things look like.
Yeah.
Inherited Church doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to see we are here to serve the kingdom of God, and behold, God is doing a new thing among us, and we're going to have to share these waters with Emergence. Antioch and Jerusalem. I still go back, to Ray Anderson's wonderful figure. Jerusalem and Antioch are together.
And for those who might not know that story either here or elsewhere, Christianity obviously comes from its Jewish roots, and Jesus in Jerusalem. That's and lived within walking distance of Jerusalem for his entire life. But within 20 years, Christianity is not centered in Jerusalem. It's centered in a Greek-speaking world in Antioch. And there's a huge cultural shift.
That's a huge
that happens.
one.
And
it's the same thing. We're doing it right now.
And the New Testament tells that story. And you're trying to say there's this non-identical repetition going on, that we're again doing that.
We are.
From one place off to this other place, and that we should have confidence. I mean, I think in a lot of ways this book is to instill confidence.
One would hope. And interestingly enough, though it's not touted very often, and even the Church of England doesn't want to say much about it, but it is a fact. I can even give you a footnote, okay?
I believe you.
The intention in the Archbishop's approach has been to serve the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
But for the first time in, now I can't remember, something like 72 years, I don't know. Anyway, last year and the year before, the Church of England grew in its numbers. Less than 1% each time. Wasn't the intention, that wasn't the purpose, but it reversed the decline by being able to engage this conversation. And as I say, it wasn't the point. But isn't it interesting that happened? I know one or two congregations whom I won't name because they asked me not to, because it's a little scary right now. One or two congregations, especially Presbyterian ones, where there has been the ability to interface the established congregation with Emergence, like here, and pick up, have they picked up 7 and 8 congregants on the other side of the wall, on the inside the sanctuary, as opposed to out here where the Emergence is. Not because they were proselytizing by doing the Emergence thing, but because some of the Emergence who get, and the Emergence are demographically 45 and under or 60 and over, right? It's the in-between ones that aren't emergent. So if you've got these primarily under 40 or 40 who've never really had a full experience, say in Presbyterianism, and they come into a Presbymergent meeting or gathering or worship, and they discover they really would like to go back. It's almost as if the genes remember what it was like being on the other side of the wall and in a formal service. And so those are growing too. It's not the point, but it is, I think, part of the hope for Inherited Church. Now, Jerusalem, it didn't work so well, right? Jerusalem, had to give up.
That whole burning of Jerusalem in AD 70 really sort of...
that just sort of shot it.
That sort of hurt
that.
Okay, we have some friends. You might know varying levels of Phyllis. We'll spend another 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Is that okay, schedule-wise? I understand you might have to go, but if not...
Yeah, Jeff.
Phyllis, historically, we're talking a lot about what's going on religiously.
Yeah.
But in this 500-year mark, maybe it's different. I think it's a little different. There's a whole lot of secularism that's emerging and that's coming about in our society that's outside of Judeo-Christianism. How is that? Is that different this time around, and what do you think that?
No, that's if I understand what you're asking, Jesse. There's always been the secular thing that was more important than the religion, and that sounds awful when you say it in religious ground. But Protestantism wasn't what it was about 500 years ago. It really wasn't. It was about humanism. It was about middle class. It was about learning how to kill each other with gunpowder instead of swords. It was, it was all those good things. And this time, this one isn't about Emergence Christianity. It's about, I have a colleague who will send me evidences of the Great Emergence every once in a while. And last November, she sent me 3. You know you're living in the Great Emergence when you have 15 cell phone numbers for your 3-member family. I thought that's okay. You know you're living in the Great Emergence when the first thing you do when you drive into your driveway is you call somebody in the house from your cell phone to come help with the groceries. That's okay. The one I loved was, you know you're living in the Great Emergence when you poke your PIN number into the microwave and can't figure out why the damn thing doesn't turn on. Which is to put, but information doubles now every slightly less than once every 10 months. Technical information doubles. That should scare us. We have 5 times more words than William Shakespeare had when he wrote the plays, because we've got 5 times more things to name. We now speak of being globalized. We have a world that's flat, and nobody is flapped by the fact that the book sells well, because we know it's true. We have Greece catching a cold, and the whole world's getting pneumonia. And what does Zacharias call that? Mergenomics is what he calls that. That's exactly what's happening economically. And you can look, one of the things in the peri-emergence is Karl Marx. I don't talk about him much because it's more, but Hegelian thought and Marx comes in economically and affects this thing. It's affected in every way. The average kid that started school last week in a technical school, in a college, at college level, is going to have everything he or she learns for this year and next year obviated by the time he or she is a junior. It will not appertain in any way. The Great China, this is my favorite because I don't know what I'm talking about, the Great China Brain Project, which is owned by our government and IBM in China's government, it went through the petaflap in May of 2010. And the petaflap being a computer that can do a quadrillion things in 1 second accurately. This year, to honor 2012, that machine, that computer, is going to go through 12 petaflaps. That is, it will do 12 quadrillion things. We can't keep up with that. There's not, if you hooked everybody in Memphis, Tennessee to the same wiring system, we wouldn't even be able to touch it. Which means that we are we are no longer in control. And every part of our society knows we are no longer in control. Now, if you want to take it, and I don't do this very often with audiences because it gets to be woo-woo, or to seem like woo-woo. If you want to take it into transhumanism, which is where it's going to go and where it has to go, if you're going to take it into the singularity, which is where it's going to go and has to go, I don't think that it's pushing the thing too far to say that we are about to have a major lurch in what human is. And I think we all know that. In our gut, I think we know that. And whether you listen to people like Nick Bostrom at Oxford, whether you look at what's happening over here in Winston-Salem or at Duke University, it's almost irresponsible not to know, or at least to listen to somebody like Morgan Freeman on what is that show? The science show, which is a popularized approach to what's happening. But we are all surrounded by the insecurity of knowing this is happening, and part of what we're peeling off is the religion part of faith, because it's the same shell as what we're peeling off when we go into transhumanism kind of thing. It's the same shell we peel off when we worship comfortably in virtuality as opposed to physicality. We're back to that.
And Phyllis, you talk about those things without a sense of judgment. Like,
that's right.
It seems like, and you do the same thing in the book. You're describing the what is without giving too much interpretation of, I wish it wasn't that way. And
I think it's kind of exciting in a way. But I think also emotion is a waste. Having an emotional opinion is a waste of time because it's going to happen. It's happening.
Spock.
That's right. Okay. I'm Dr. Spock when it comes to this. That's right. It's the dis-ease, the unease.
Yeah.
We wouldn't laugh about the jokes about the changes in Emergence if we. You only laugh when you know it's true.
It's true.
And it almost hurts, and so you laugh to get rid of it. And that unease is important. When you do things like Dinah Butler Bass's Christianity Beyond Religion, and it sells and it's the best book she's done. I was pleased to say so on the back cover. There's no question about it. But the question
What didn't you like about her previous books?
Oh, I loved her previous books. But she just keeps getting better and better. She just keeps getting better and better. When you recognize that there is a flux here, and that flux is going to affect all of Christianity. It's not going to, but...
Great. All right. Sybil.
Well, I'm not sure if this... You're talking about the last 150 years, right? I've been thinking about the next 150 years.
Good. You're my girl.
I read a lot of young adult fiction.
You should.
And
it's where it is.
It's all
shades of...
No, gray is not a color. Gray is not a color.
A broader sense thing.
But YA...
Post-apocalyptic, dystopian novels, and they're all... And it looks like there are all these oppressive cultures in which you're told exactly what to do. And so I'm thinking that the 20s and 30s who are writing these books, their impression is that, and it may be just because of what we hear in the media, there's all this backlash against all this scientific stuff, and we're going to fix it. And I noticed that, I've stopped getting invited to some Catholic functions because I am not Catholic. And 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened, and now it's happening again.
That's right.
So,
it happened.
Do you think these are really? Are these accurate of what's going to happen, or do they just reflect?
I think they reflect a cultural anxiety. I do, and also I think it's easier to sell than it is but the YAs have a great deal to tell us, and we should be in the same way that in the 70s you got, Great Planet Earth, all of that kind of stuff. But the dysfunction part of it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be if we know what's happening and are willing to do something about it. It doesn't have to be. But the threat is very real. You know it as well as I do. The machine can take over very quickly. If we begin at the University of North Carolina, they've developed mice that don't have a brain. They're run by, they're living creatures. Yeah. And it won't be long. It ain't far from mice to pigs, and it ain't far from pigs to us. It just isn't as we learn how to do it. So all of that's dystopian stuff. We need to be paying attention to. If you don't want to read YA, look at the Singularity University. Just go out and grab them, or Vita Moore, and look at her work. It's everywhere.
So I think we have time for two more.
Oh, but I don't think I answered Sybil yet. I think I wandered around.
My question, you kind of touched on Moore's Law, where everything changes.
Yeah, and Moore's Law comes into. You're absolutely right.
And so my question is, you broke everything down into these 500 year periods. My generation has recently been classified. I'm in my 40s. We've been recently classified as the first generation to get more liberal the older we get. And I'm wondering,
that's right,
if what we're going to see instead of a 500-year period is a 250-year period because of the speed of transmission of information.
That's a very astute question. And now, if I read correctly, we are getting credible folk who say that Moore's Law will cease to appertain sometime within about 9 years, so that there will not be that exponential growth in information. We will arrive when it ceases to expand. And on that basis, they are arguing. And again, if I had my life to do over, I would do something in physics. But to do that, I'd have to do mathematics, which means I'd have to have a whole different DNA, because I don't understand systems theorists. I just want them to shut up and quit telling me, It's nice to be told you're right, but not in formulae, Yeah. But if they are correct, the 500-year thing won't be affected in any way. It will continue. And the argument always gets down to the Everglades renews every 52 years regardless, and I think if anybody tells me about the Everglades one more time, I'm going to kill them, But regardless of how we warm the earth. So the answer academically, I think, would be no, the 500 years will probably hold. Now, having said that, more than Moore's Law or any of that, I think Philip Jenkins certainly would have me say here, and so would some other folks, right? The X factor is that very carefully when we started this harangue, I said Latinized Christianity, or that part of the world that was susceptible to a mindset that can speak itself in the Latin language. Christianity's majority now, as you know, is in Africa and in the Far East. And I don't think we have any way of knowing how much Christianity, as it becomes global instead of regional, and that's what's happening, is it's becoming global. That's a big part of Emergence Christianity, is the globalization of it. As that happens, is our pattern going to be suppressed as we are less and less important in the formation of the world, of the global faith? And I think that's a real question. And again, Jenkins obviously is the best known scholar. I don't know, but in this, and he raises that question very well. And it's been interesting to me that Brian McLaurin, who is to emergence as Martin Luther was to the Reformation, has spent more and more time. He hates that.
His wife doesn't like that.
I know she doesn't. Grace is just wrong. That's
because the way Luther treated his wife.
I know. Katie, but Katie made good beer. She whatever. Anyway. He spends a great deal of time in Africa at their invitation, which is fascinating to me, and just to see, because those channels of operation are now of communication are now open. Another thing that fascinates me is that Canada, I can spend half my life literally crossing the Canadian border these days, and 30 minutes behind us in all of this, no more than that, and it interests me to see that North American Christianity, 50 years ago, you would not have been. Now there's this kind of joining ranks, if you will, to make North American Christianity, which I interpret as a sort of bulwarking, if you will, bulwarking of it, that we join together in what's nearer to a common culture than what the rest of it is. The other thing, of course, is going to be the impact of Islam, as it forces some theology that we're not yet forced to face in this country, primarily Trinitarian doctrine and Christian exclusivity and universalism are going to have to be dealt with, and those are being forced, as you know, in France and in the UK, to some extent in Spain, certainly in Italy, and we haven't had to face that. So this kind of closing of the ranks with Canada is fascinating to me to watch.
Well, July 11th and 12th, we'll spend 2 days on this, but for today...
No, January.
January, what did I say?
July. But that's okay. It's been a long day.
Pay attention. Thank you for listening, though. January, just don't pay any attention to it. But for today, one more question.
No, that was a great question.
This is kind of playing off Sybil's, but historically, all of these changes got very bloody. Do you think this one...
Every time they've gotten bloody.
Do you think this one have more potential to be peaceful, or do I need to go buy a gun?
Well... That or a bunch of drugs that you can get. Never mind. No. Every time it has. Sybil, that's the reason I felt like I didn't really address Sybil's question. Every single time there has been a period of huge bloodshed. I think what everybody hopes is that this is the first time we've known what we were doing, and surely we can prevent the bloodshed. This time we don't have to do it. I have some colleagues who will argue, but we've already begun. The minute we bomb an abortion clinic, we have begun, and you can date that from the 70s. You can say that's the beginning of the bloodshed of the argument, and there's a legitimate position there. I'm not quite sure I want to go there. It's equally true that since Islam came along, each of them has opened with Islam, and that's why 9/11 is now being called the mark that emergence will be dated from, because it was an Islamic assault. I think that's fairly unfair, maybe, or ill-advised. I'm sorry, it's not up to me to say the date, but that appears to be it. But we're definitely we're dancing around the possibility of bloodshed, and we could sure do it very quickly if we're not careful. If we don't know what we're in and why we're in it, and we don't see the pattern. Because the Inquisition was restarted 500 years ago, right? And that's, all of that, yeah. The 30 Years' War, bloodiest one in European history, all of it came as a result of the Reformation. And we're dancing. Pray God we're smart enough, or prayerful enough, or humble enough to avoid it. The X factor, again, is exactly what Sib said. What happens when we get into a dysfunctional society where there is enormous power, and that power will be technological. There any question that who controls the technology is going to control the world. That's just how that is. And we know that in our gut. We know that. Can you control tech? If you're going to get a gun, I suspect you should not go get an old-timey one. You should, a 22 ain't going to do it. Yeah.
Phyllis, thank you. Thank you for today. Thanks for the book. And thanks for everything.
All right, friends, there it is, my hour-long conversation with Phyllis and some of her friends in Memphis, Tennessee. If that was intriguing to you and you'd like to join into the larger conversation, head over to phyllistickle.com and you'll find a link to the event on January 11th and 12th of 2013 in Memphis, Tennessee, and you can join us for a couple of days. I'll also put that on the Doug Padgett radio page over the next day or so. So if you listen to this the first day that it's been posted, you can find a link to register for the event there. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back live next week on Doug Padgett Radio. Over and out.